Hello, this is Brian Scuttle with Sonic Cinema, one of the filmmakers I had a chance to interview for Fantasia Fest was director Cody Calahan, and his film The Oak Room, which is playing at the fest, is an interesting use of storytelling to define character more than tell a straightforward narrative, and I hope you enjoy our discussion. So before we start talking about the Oak Room, uh, what inspired you to become a filmmaker?
Holy shit! Big questions first. Okay. Um, I, I guess I grew up in like a really small town outside of Kingston, Ontario, and there's wasn't much to do besides sort of play outside and watch movies. So I kind of grew up addicted to like renting VHS from like the local convenience store.
Mm,
And I don't know. Always had a fascination with it. There was no real moment. It was just sort of something that I loved to do and did it as a kid, and kind of went to university and sort of followed the like. I think I'm supposed to go to university for it, and then I think I'm supposed to get a job, and then I think I'm supposed to. So it kind of it's a slow process, but I think I sort of just fell into doing it, and now here we are.
okay. Uh, were there any particular filmmakers that inspired you as you started to develop your personal style or interests in the types of stories you wanted to tell?
I feel like, yeah, it's such a interesting question because I kind of feel like it changes with
Mm-hmm.
like each project. I sort of find find directors that I love just for certain projects at the time, but I've always been sort of into like P.T. Anderson, Darren Aronofsky, and even like Harmony Korine at times. And like for the Oak Room, with a lot of old some of Quentin Tarantino's first stuff and David Mamet and stuff like that. So I think it's kind of I get inspired by different directors for different projects.
Okay. Um, well, let's go ahead and start in on the Oak Room. What was what led you to choose this project to work on?
So it used to be, or it originated as a play,
Mm-hmm.
and Ari Millen, who plays Michael in the film, also played Michael in the play. And I think it premiered at the Fringe Festival in Toronto in 2013. And right after that, I remember Ari called me and he was like, "This would make such a great movie." And at that time, I think I had just finished Antisocial, which was my first film as a director, and the idea of adapting the play just seemed a daunting task. So the conversation quickly ended. But a few years later, he sent me the play and just was like, "You just got to take time and read this and trust me." And I did. And I was captivated by the stage play. Um, and I met with the writer Peter Genoway and Ari and Chad Archibald, the producer, and we all sat down and sort of talked about what it would look like as a movie. And the exciting part is it was about adding and tweaking a few things, but we sort of decided pretty quick that we would keep true to the dialogue and keep true to how the plays sort of played out, and keep true to the stage play, which was exciting within itself and a challenge, obviously. But yeah, it was a reading the original screenplay or the stage play. We didn't change much, so
Mm-hmm.
it was obvious right away. It was something I wanted to do.
Well, and one of the things that I really am interested about when it comes to this movie, and one of the things that really intrigued me was the idea that the 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 idea of these characters telling these stories is less about necessarily moving a plot forward as revealing the characters not only who are telling the stories but also who are listening to the stories. And I was really like what what were there any particular challenges because of the fact that this is such a closed setting in terms of making this a compelling movie?
Yeah, I mean, beyond the challenges that every film has, it was definitely interesting because obviously the entire movie is leading up to the end of the story that R.J. Mitty's Steve is telling, and so the sort of the climax of how that story ends. I knew if I could get an audience to that point, then that last sort of 10 minutes of the showdown between the two of them, the verbal showdown between the two of them, I'd have them. So it was about getting to that one scene, and we sort of approached each sort of section before it kind of cuts away to either the car approaching or it cuts away to the story in the oak room. We sort of approached each section as kind of like a short film, and made sure that it within itself it had sort of a beginning, a middle, and an end, so that just as it's sort of like the audience kind of starts to say, okay, where is this going? We cut to something else and we start a new story, from A, B, and C. So I think the challenge was sort of rather than attacking the movie as a whole, we first started to attack each scene as like sort of a short film, and then sort of pieced them together, kind of like an anthology.
Okay. Were there any particular technical challenges as far as making the movie that you found?
Yeah, for sure. Like originally, because it was such a sort of raw story, I wanted to shoot in real bars, in real places, and we scouted for a long time. But just the challenges on the budget we had of actually like closing down a bar, and just logistically fitting a camera in a bar that looks great to the eye. It's like as soon as you get a camera and a crew in there, you don't have any room. So we scouted everywhere around on southern Ontario and from Kingston to Hamilton to up to Guelph and around there, and we found some great options, but nothing clicked. So we decided we had to build the bars, and it's actually the set it's just one set that gets redressed. So that, I mean, it was a challenge of designing a set that was small enough that it felt isolated and contained, but big enough that we could shoot in, because we also didn't want to make something where we could move walls, because we wanted to put a roof on it, so that when the talent was there, they felt like they were legitimately in a small town bar. So that, I mean, that was the first challenge, was definitely the set. Second one was such a simple story. The first instinct that me and Jeff Mahar, the DOP, had was the camera's got to be a character in itself, and it's got to propel the story. And so we did a bunch of tests of how the camera would move around these actors, but we realized that the more the camera moved, the more it took away from the actors and the dialogue, which is what really drives the film. So we ended up really stripping it down, and it's probably one of the more simple shot lists and camera moves from some of the other films that I've done with Jeff. But in the simplicity, there's obviously challenges of, how slow to move the camera so the audience can't see it moving, and when to move the camera and when not to. So it was interesting, but I would say, yeah, those were probably the big challenges, because it's such a unique story, and it's very different from anything that I've directed. So the whole thing was a challenge, but those two things stood out.
Yeah, and I definitely see when you were talking about Tarantino and Mamet earlier as being particularly inspiring for this film in particular. I mean, you definitely need. I think the importance of the dialogue, and because of the fact that it's more dialogue than action that drives the story, that's where this movie really is going to rise or fall with. Were there any particular works of theirs that you drew particular inspiration from?
Not necessarily particular films, but just sort of in general how, you know, Quentin Tarantino sometimes relies on these, you know, obviously he's extremely talented actors, but his dialogue is sort of this dance between the actors and the words and how they're said and how they sound and how two actors sort of, you know, put together sentences back and forth. So I sort of, you know, obviously Peter Genoway has, you know, takes most of the accolades here of the writing, just because it's such a great script and it jumped off the page. But I kind of, you know, watched a bunch of Quentin Tarantino movies and David Mamet and stuff just to sort of get into the mindset of, okay, like, you know, where does the camera go? How is he covering these scenes? How should I sort of approach the actors within the scene? So there's not like a film that I was like, oh, I want it to look or feel like this film of theirs. It was sort of just them as directors in general.
Yeah. No, and I have to say, it's like I'm always a bit. I always find myself being a bit partial when it comes to movies that take place in the snow for one way or another, and I really like the cutaways that you have in terms of the car driving and the snowfall and stuff, and I really, that adds so much atmosphere, just those brief cutaways to the film in general. It really, I feel like it adds something to the pending dread that we have built up in us as we're watching this film.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's also that there's that whole sort of trick of kind of, when you're going to make a film that's so isolated and that it is two locations, but, you know, let's be honest, they're both bars. They do look a little different, but they're still sort of the same vibe and feel. So it's about getting outside of those bars and getting sort of as wide and really moving the camera and speed of the shots to just sort of let the audience eyeballs rest. And also to show that it's like, you know, we're not in these bars with two characters because we didn't have the money. That's what the story is, and making sure that nobody gets taken away from the ride because they dwell on little things like that. So it was really important that all the cutaways have a vastness to them, and that's why me and Jeff chose to shoot the whole thing anamorphic, just to give it even more of that cinematic experience. So when you're in the bar, it's quite wide, and you can capture more of the set.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today. It was really good to talk to you.